Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, stands as one of the most prominent figures in the intellectual history of the medieval Islamic world. His contributions spanned across multiple disciplines, including philosophy, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and theology. Born in 980 CE in the city of AVICENNA, near Bokhara, modern-day Uzbekistan, Avicenna was an embodiment of the intellectual fusion that characterized the Islamic Golden Age. His work has had a profound and lasting influence, shaping not only the Islamic tradition but also Western thought, particularly during the Renaissance. Avicenna's significance can be measured by the sheer volume and diversity of his intellectual output. His magnum opus, the Canon of Medicine, became a central medical reference in both the East and West for centuries. His philosophical writings, especially the Book of Healing and the Book of Knowledge, positioned him as one of the foremost proponents of Neoplatonic and Aristotelian philosophy. His influence extended beyond the confines of his own era, as later philosophers, such as Thomas Aquinas and Averroes, engaged deeply with his ideas, further cementing his place in the intellectual history of the world. Central to understanding Avicenna's legacy is the context in which he lived. The Islamic Golden Age, which spanned roughly from the 8th to the 14th centuries, was a time of profound cultural and intellectual flourishing. This period saw the translation and preservation of ancient Greek and Roman knowledge, particularly from figures like Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy. These works were then expanded upon and interpreted by Islamic scholars, whose engagement with these ideas led to significant advances in science and philosophy. Avicenna was at the heart of this intellectual movement, synthesizing classical knowledge with his own groundbreaking contributions. Avicenna's influence on medicine is perhaps his most enduring legacy. The Canon of Medicine remains a foundational text in the history of medicine, renowned for its systematic approach to diagnosing and treating diseases. His contributions were not limited to the practice of medicine. He also laid the groundwork for a more empirical approach to scientific inquiry. Avicenna's method of studying diseases, anatomy, and pharmacology helped to shape the future of medical practice in both the Islamic world and medieval Europe. In the realm of philosophy, Avicenna was a pioneering thinker who sought to reconcile Aristotelian and Neoplatonic ideas with Islamic theology. His philosophical system, which became known as Avicennism, was rooted in the concept of necessary existence and the idea that everything in the universe, from the most trivial object to the cosmos itself, exists due to the will of a single, necessary being, God. This metaphysical framework not only influenced Islamic philosophers such as Al-Ghazali and Averroes, but it also had a profound impact on Christian thinkers, particularly in the development of scholasticism. What distinguishes Avicenna from other philosophers of his time was his ability to merge different intellectual traditions. His philosophy, which was deeply influenced by Aristotle, was also shaped by the Neoplatonic tradition, particularly the works of Plotinus. Avicenna integrated these influences into a coherent and systematic worldview, creating a bridge between the ancient Greek philosophers and Islamic thought. His works on logic, ethics, and metaphysics laid the foundation for later developments in these fields, making him a pivotal figure in the transmission of knowledge from the classical world to the medieval and Renaissance periods. Avicenna's legacy is not confined to philosophy and medicine alone. His contributions to other fields, such as astronomy, mathematics, and chemistry, were significant, though often overshadowed by his more well-known works. In astronomy, Avicenna made critical advancements in understanding the motion of celestial bodies. His work in chemistry, particularly on the nature of substances and their transformations, contributed to the development of early alchemical thought. Another key aspect of Avicenna's intellectual journey was his ability to balance the demands of both secular and religious life. As a scholar in the Islamic world, he navigated a delicate relationship between philosophy and theology. His philosophical writings, though deeply rooted in reason and logic, sought to reconcile the insights of human intellect with the teachings of Islam. This tension between reason and faith would become a defining feature of his legacy and the broader philosophical discourse of the Islamic Golden Age. Despite his vast contributions, Avicenna's life was not without challenges. He faced political turmoil, personal hardships, and the challenges of living in a time of intellectual and religious strife. He served as a physician and advisor to several rulers, but he also endured periods of exile and imprisonment. These personal difficulties, however, did not hinder his intellectual productivity. In fact, they may have further fueled his desire to understand the world and contribute to the knowledge of his time. Avicenna's influence, while initially contained within the realms of the Islamic world, eventually spread to Europe. Through the Latin translations of his works in the 12th and 13th centuries, his ideas became central to the scholastic tradition. Philosophers like Thomas Aquinas and Albert the Great engaged with Avicenna's writings, adapting them to the Christian intellectual tradition. This cross-cultural exchange of ideas was crucial in shaping the intellectual landscape of medieval Europe, particularly in the development of Christian scholasticism. Avicenna, born Abu Ali al-Husayn ibn Abdullah ibn Sina in 980 CE, hailed from the Persian region that today constitutes part of modern-day Uzbekistan. His early years were marked by an environment brimming with intellectual curiosity and a wealth of knowledge. The city of Bokhara, where Avicenna spent his formative years, was one of the most important cultural and scholarly centers of the Islamic Golden Age. It was within this environment that Avicenna began his lifelong journey of learning, shaped by a world of scholars, thinkers, and teachers. Avicenna's father, Abdullah, was a distinguished scholar and a well-regarded figure in the region, and his mother came from a family of intellectuals as well. His father played a pivotal role in his education, ensuring that Avicenna had access to the best teachers and scholars of the time. It was under his guidance that Avicenna began to learn the foundations of classical Arabic literature, logic, and religious studies. He also absorbed teachings from the Quran and Islamic jurisprudence, which provided a solid grounding in religious knowledge that would stay with him throughout his career. What stands out about Avicenna's early education is the breadth and depth of subjects he encountered at a young age. By the age of 10, he had already mastered the Quran and was well-versed in basic Islamic jurisprudence. His aptitude for learning was remarkable, and by 14, he had completed the study of several fundamental subjects, including grammar, rhetoric, and logic. At this early age, he showed exceptional promise in the intellectual arts, leading his father to seek out more advanced tutors for him. One of the most notable teachers in Avicenna's youth was a scholar named Abu Abdullah al-Natili, a well-known philosopher and mathematician. Under al-Natili's tutelage, Avicenna delved into the works of Aristotle and other Greek philosophers. It was during this period that Avicenna's fascination with philosophy began to take shape. He studied the writings of Aristotle, focusing particularly on metaphysics and logic, and gradually developed a deep interest in understanding the nature of existence, the cosmos, and the workings of the human mind. Avicenna's engagement with Greek philosophy was far from superficial. He engaged critically with the texts, often seeking to reconcile the ideas of Greek philosophers with the religious and cultural frameworks of Islam. In addition to his philosophical studies, Avicenna also became interested in medicine at an early age. His encounter with the medical writings of the great Greek physician Galen and the Persian physician Rhazes sparked a passion that would define much of his intellectual life. He studied anatomy, physiology, and the treatment of diseases under the guidance of various medical practitioners. Avicenna's early exposure to medical texts and his natural curiosity led him to become particularly interested in the systematic approach to diagnosing and treating illnesses. This early engagement with medicine laid the groundwork for his later groundbreaking contributions to the field. During his youth, Avicenna's intellect and curiosity were not limited to formal schooling alone. He was known for his prodigious ability to self-teach, devouring books on subjects ranging from mathematics and astronomy to metaphysics and ethics. His insatiable thirst for knowledge pushed him to study independently, seeking out rare manuscripts and engaging in private study whenever possible. Avicenna's ability to absorb and synthesize diverse knowledge made him stand out even among his peers, and he quickly gained a reputation as a gifted and determined scholar. The intellectual environment of Bokhara at the time was one of vibrant exchange. Scholars, scientists, and intellectuals from various regions of the Islamic world converged in the city, creating a dynamic atmosphere where ideas from Greece, Persia, India, and beyond were shared, debated, and developed. This exchange of knowledge profoundly shaped Avicenna's worldview. His early exposure to these rich traditions provided him with the tools necessary to blend different intellectual traditions into his own unique philosophical framework. He was not just a passive recipient of knowledge. He engaged actively with the texts, critiquing them, and often pushing the boundaries of accepted thought. At the age of 18, Avicenna faced a life-altering challenge. His father passed away, leaving the young scholar with the responsibility of supporting his family. In this period of personal loss, Avicenna turned to his studies more than ever, using knowledge as a refuge. However, his life became more complicated as political instability in Bokhara began to mount. The city, under the control of the Samanid dynasty, was experiencing turmoil, and eventually, the political unrest would force Avicenna to leave the city. The political upheaval in Bokhara prompted Avicenna to travel throughout the Persian region, including to the cities of Gurgan, Ray, and Isfahan, seeking both security and opportunities for further intellectual growth. During his travels, Avicenna sought out new teachers and gained access to advanced works in philosophy, medicine, and the sciences. His time in Isfahan, in particular, was crucial in shaping his understanding of Aristotelian philosophy and logic. He became increasingly adept at synthesizing and developing ideas from these texts, forging a distinctive philosophical style that would later come to define his intellectual legacy. Avicenna's educational journey also included moments of intense personal reflection. In the midst of his studies, he began to grapple with fundamental questions about the nature of existence, the purpose of life, and the relationship between faith and reason. These questions would occupy much of his later work and lead him to create a philosophical system that sought to harmonize the teachings of Islam with the reasoned insights of Greek philosophy. It was during this period of intellectual maturation that Avicenna came to view philosophy and science as complementary paths to understanding the divine. As Avicenna's intellectual journey progressed, his philosophical evolution became one of the most defining aspects of his legacy. During his formative years, the young scholar not only absorbed the teachings of the classical Greek philosophers, but also sought to harmonize these teachings with the theological frameworks of Islam. The period in which Avicenna lived was one of intense philosophical activity, with key figures such as Al-Farabi and the Persian polymath Al-Razi making significant contributions to the philosophical and scientific discourse. Avicenna was keenly aware of these thinkers, and their works would play a critical role in shaping his own philosophical worldview. One of the most significant early influences on Avicenna was the philosophy of Aristotle. Avicenna's encounter with Aristotle's writings was not only transformative, but also shaped the course of his philosophical career. His studies of Aristotle's metaphysics, ethics, and de anima deeply impacted his thinking. Aristotle's ideas on logic, substance, and the nature of being became central tenets of Avicenna's own philosophical system. Yet Avicenna did not adopt Aristotle's views uncritically. Rather, he interpreted and expanded upon them, making them fit within the intellectual and theological context of Islam. Avicenna's approach to Aristotelian philosophy was far from orthodox. While Aristotle's philosophy was grounded in empirical observation and categorization of the natural world, Avicenna's perspective integrated a more metaphysical framework. In particular, Avicenna took issue with Aristotle's concept of the unmoved mover and sought to refine it. Avicenna proposed a more elaborate system of metaphysical thought centered on the concept of necessary existence, wujub al-wujud. He argued that everything in existence has a cause, but that the ultimate cause of all existence is a necessary being, one that does not depend on anything else for its existence. This idea became foundational in his philosophy and would later influence medieval European scholars. Another key influence on Avicenna was Neoplatonism, particularly the works of Plotinus. The Neoplatonic tradition, with its emphasis on the ascent of the soul toward the one, or the ultimate principle of reality, resonated with Avicenna. While Aristotle's focus was on the material world and its causes, Plotinus' metaphysical view provided a more transcendent framework that Avicenna would incorporate into his own system. Avicenna adopted the Neoplatonic concept of emanation, which held that all beings and substances emanate from the ultimate reality, much like light emanates from the sun. This idea was pivotal in Avicenna's understanding of how the universe came into existence and how various forms of existence are hierarchically related. At the same time, Avicenna was heavily influenced by the work of Islamic philosophers who preceded him, especially Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi, often referred to as the second teacher after Aristotle, was instrumental in transmitting Greek philosophical thought to the Islamic world. His interpretations of Aristotle, combined with his own original contributions, offered a bridge between Greek philosophy and Islamic thought. Avicenna was introduced to Al-Farabi's synthesis of philosophy and logic, which serve as a significant framework for Avicenna's own philosophical investigations. Al-Farabi's political philosophy, which explored the ideal state and the role of the philosopher king, also had a lasting impact on Avicenna's later writings, particularly in his discussions on ethics and the nature of human flourishing. Yet, while Avicenna was deeply influenced by Greek and earlier Islamic philosophers, he was also a critical thinker in his own right. He did not accept ideas without challenge. One of the key areas where Avicenna differed from his predecessors was in his approach to epistemology, or the theory of knowledge. Avicenna was determined to bridge the gap between reason and faith, a challenge that many philosophers of the time struggled with. He believed that reason and revelation were not mutually exclusive. Instead, he argued that both could lead to the same truth, albeit through different methods. In his view, the empirical world could be understood through the senses and reason, but ultimate knowledge of God and the soul could only be obtained through divine revelation. This dual approach became central to his philosophy. Avicenna's work was also marked by a deep engagement with metaphysics. His concept of necessary existence led to a complex and nuanced theory of existence. Avicenna posited that there are two types of existence: necessary and contingent. Necessary existence refers to that which must exist by its very nature and which cannot not exist. Contingent existence, on the other hand, refers to things that depend on something else for their existence. This distinction was central to his metaphysical framework and underpinned much of his later work. By focusing on the concept of necessary existence, Avicenna developed a highly structured and hierarchical view of reality, one in which everything has its place in the chain of being. Philosophy for Avicenna was not merely an abstract pursuit. It had practical implications for understanding the human condition and the nature of the cosmos. His reflections on the soul and its relation to the body are particularly noteworthy. Avicenna's views on the soul were influenced by the work of Aristotle, but he also incorporated elements of Neoplatonism and Islamic mysticism. He argued that the soul is an immaterial substance that is distinct from the body, yet it is intimately connected to the material world. The soul's journey, according to Avicenna, is one of intellectual ascent, moving from the world of sensory perception to the world of pure intellect. This ascent, for Avicenna, was the soul's return to its origin in the necessary being, or God. While his philosophical influences were diverse, Avicenna was not merely a follower of earlier thinkers. He was an innovator who synthesized various intellectual traditions into a coherent system that was distinctly his own. His approach to philosophy was marked by rigorous logical reasoning, and he developed a sophisticated methodology for analyzing complex metaphysical and ethical issues. His works on logic, such as the Al-Shifa, the Book of Healing, laid the groundwork for later developments in Islamic and Western logic. Avicenna's influence on the development of logic cannot be overstated, as his work provided a bridge between classical Greek logic and a logic used in the medieval scholastic tradition. Furthermore, Avicenna's philosophical thought was deeply intertwined with his understanding of theology. He did not view philosophy and religion as separate or competing fields, but rather as complementary ways of understanding the same divine truth. His efforts to reconcile reason and revelation would leave a lasting mark on the development of Islamic philosophy and the broader intellectual tradition. His work provided a philosophical framework for understanding religious concepts like the existence of God, the nature of the soul, and the afterlife, topics that were central to the theological debates of his time. Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, Al-Canon fi al-Tib, stands as one of the most significant texts in the history of medical knowledge. Composed in the early 11th century, this monumental work synthesized the medical theories and practices of ancient Greek, Roman, and Indian scholars, combining them with his own observations and innovations. The canon would go on to dominate medical thinking in both the Islamic world and Europe for centuries, shaping the field of medicine until the Renaissance. Avicenna's ability to blend ancient knowledge with novel insights marked a pivotal moment in the history of medicine, making the canon a lasting legacy. Avicenna's medical career began early in his life, influenced by his exposure to the works of Hippocrates and Galen, as well as the pioneering medical practices of Persian scholars such as Rhazes. As a young man, he absorbed the medical knowledge of his time, while simultaneously developing a deeper understanding of the human body through hands-on experience as a physician. His early studies were not limited to the theoretical aspects of medicine, but were deeply rooted in practical observation. Avicenna's unique approach was rooted in his belief that medical science must be both empirically driven and grounded in a deep understanding of human physiology. The Canon of Medicine was not merely a textbook of medical knowledge. It was a comprehensive system that sought to classify diseases, their symptoms, and appropriate treatments. Avicenna structured the text in 5 books, each dealing with a different aspect of medical science. The first book covers the general principles of medicine, including anatomy, physiology, and hygiene. The second book discusses the causes and symptoms of diseases, while the third book focuses on pharmacology, detailing the properties and uses of various medicines. The fourth book delves into the treatment of diseases, including surgical procedures and the role of diet. Finally, the fifth book explores the impact of specific diseases on the human body, focusing on the treatment of various ailments. One of the key innovations in the canon was Avicenna's development of a systematic method for diagnosing diseases. Unlike many of his predecessors, who relied on vague theories or superstitions, Avicenna emphasized the importance of direct observation and logical deduction. He believed that diseases could be understood through careful examination of symptoms, and that treatment should be tailored to the individual's condition. His diagnostic methodology, which included careful examination of pulse, urine, and other bodily fluids, laid the groundwork for future advancements in clinical practice. The emphasis on empirical observation would later influence the scientific method in modern medical practice. In addition to his work on diagnosis, Avicenna made significant contributions to pharmacology. He cataloged and described hundreds of drugs, many of which were derived from plants, minerals, and animal substances. Avicenna's approach to pharmacology was revolutionary for its time. He not only listed the medicinal properties of various substances, but also provided detailed instructions on how to prepare and administer them. Many of the drugs he described in the canon were used well into the modern era. Avicenna's understanding of the relationship between medicine and chemistry was ahead of its time, and his work laid the foundation for later developments in both fields. Avicenna's holistic approach to medicine was another defining feature of the canon. Unlike some of his contemporaries, who viewed the body and mind as separate entities, Avicenna believed in the interconnectedness of physical and mental health. He recognized that psychological factors could contribute to physical ailments and vice versa, and he advocated for treatments that took both into account. His recognition of the mind-body connection would influence later medical and psychological theories, particularly in the development of holistic health practices. Another significant aspect of the canon was its treatment of surgery. Although Avicenna was primarily known for his contributions to internal medicine, he also addressed surgical techniques, acknowledging the importance of skilled surgery in the treatment of certain conditions. He provided detailed instructions on how to treat wounds, fractures, and other injuries, and his work included early descriptions of surgical instruments and procedures. Avicenna's approach to surgery was not only grounded in empirical observation, but also informed by his deep understanding of human anatomy, which he studied in detail. The canon was not limited to theoretical knowledge. It was also deeply practical, offering guidance for medical practitioners. Avicenna placed great emphasis on the role of the physician as a healer, both of the body and the soul. He believed that a physician's character was just as important as their technical knowledge, and he outlined the qualities that a good doctor should possess: compassion, patience, and a commitment to the well-being of the patient. This ethical dimension of Avicenna's medical philosophy influenced not only Islamic medicine, but also European medical thought, particularly in the development of the Hippocratic Oath. The impact of the canon of medicine was not confined to Avicenna's own time. It was translated into Latin in the 12th century, during a period of intense intellectual exchange between the Islamic world and Christian Europe. The Latin translations of the canon became a standard medical text in European universities, influencing the development of Western medicine for several centuries. Even figures such as Thomas Aquinas engaged with Avicenna's medical writings, incorporating them into their own philosophical and theological frameworks. Avicenna's influence on Western medicine was particularly profound during the Renaissance, when his works were rediscovered and revered for their clarity and systematization. In the Islamic world, the canon remained an authoritative text for centuries, consulted by scholars, physicians, and students alike. It continued to be studied in universities and medical schools, and its methods were adopted and adapted by later Muslim physicians, such as al-Razi and Ibn al-Nafis. The canon also influenced the development of Islamic pharmacology and surgery, particularly in regions such as the Ottoman Empire and Persia. Avicenna's approach to medicine, which emphasized both theory and practice, became a model for later generations of doctors. Despite the canon's immense success, Avicenna's medical writings were not without criticism. Some later scholars found fault with his reliance on certain ancient texts, particularly the works of Galen, whose ideas were later proven to be inaccurate in some respects. However, Avicenna's ability to blend classical knowledge with his own innovations ensured that his work remained relevant and influential throughout the centuries. Even as new discoveries were made in medicine, Avicenna's diagnostic methods, his pharmacological classifications, and his understanding of the human body continued to provide valuable insights. Throughout his life, Avicenna found himself embroiled in the political and social upheavals of the regions he inhabited. The intellectual and political landscape of the Islamic world during the 10th and 11th centuries was one of rapid change and turbulence, with various empires, kingdoms, and dynasties vying for power. Avicenna, as a scholar deeply embedded in the cultural and intellectual fabric of his time, had to navigate not only the shifting political landscape, but also the challenges posed by rival scholars, rulers, and religious authorities. The early part of Avicenna's career was shaped by the decline of the Samanid dynasty in Bokhara, the city where he was born. As political instability grew in the region, many intellectuals, including Avicenna, were forced to flee to other parts of Persia in search of refuge and patronage. The rise of the Ghaznavid dynasty in the late 10th century marked a significant shift in the region's political structure, and the new rulers were not always friendly to the intellectual currents that Avicenna championed. Nevertheless, Avicenna continued to pursue his scholarly work, believing that knowledge transcended political boundaries. One of the most notable episodes in Avicenna's life occurred during his time in the court of the Ghaznavid ruler, Mahmud of Ghazni. Avicenna initially found favor in Mahmud's court, but his relationships with the political elite were often strained. He was appointed as a personal physician to the ruler, and his medical expertise was highly valued. However, Avicenna's relationship with Mahmud deteriorated when he became involved in a political conflict within the court. Avicenna's interactions with the court's intrigues and power struggles brought him into conflict with various factions, leading to his eventual fall from favor. Despite his contributions to medicine and philosophy, Avicenna found himself imprisoned at one point due to political maneuvering, a reflection of how volatile the political environment could be for scholars and intellectuals. This period of imprisonment was a turning point in Avicenna's life. It was during his confinement that he wrote some of his most important works, including parts of his canon of medicine and his philosophical treatises. Avicenna's ability to continue his intellectual work despite being physically restrained is a testament to his resilience and dedication to scholarship. His time in prison did not break his spirit. Instead, it allowed him to reflect on the nature of power, knowledge, and freedom. Avicenna's writings from this period reveal his deep concern with the political and social dynamics of his time and the ways in which they influenced the pursuit of truth and knowledge. Avicenna's time in captivity also led him to develop a more nuanced understanding of political philosophy. As a physician and philosopher, he was acutely aware of the interplay between intellectual freedom and political authority. His experiences with rulers, courts, and political intrigue provided him with insights into the corrupting influence of power and the ways in which rulers could manipulate knowledge for their own gain. In his later works, Avicenna discussed the role of the philosopher king, drawing from both Aristotle's political philosophy and his own observations of the political realities around him. For Avicenna, the philosopher was not merely an intellectual detached from the world, but someone who must engage with and seek to reform the political structures around them. Despite these political struggles, Avicenna also had significant moments of success within various courts. After his release from imprisonment, he moved to the city of Isfahan, where he found patronage from the Buyid dynasty. The Buyids, though not as politically powerful as the Ghaznavids, were more supportive of intellectual pursuits. Under their protection, Avicenna was able to engage in more free and productive scholarly work. He became a prominent physician and philosopher in Isfahan, with his medical knowledge and philosophical insights highly regarded by the local elite. During his time in Isfahan, Avicenna was also able to engage with other intellectuals and scholars, enriching his own philosophical ideas. The city was a hub for the exchange of knowledge, and Avicenna's position in the court allowed him to interact with scholars of different disciplines. This intellectual environment was conducive to Avicenna's growth as a philosopher, enabling him to refine his ideas and expand his influence. His contributions to medicine, philosophy, and logic during this period cemented his reputation as one of the most important thinkers of his time. The political and social dynamics of Avicenna's life also influenced his views on education. Throughout his career, Avicenna was deeply concerned with the state of learning in the Islamic world. He believed that intellectual pursuits should be free from political interference and that scholars should be allowed to teach and conduct research without fear of persecution. His own experiences, both as a teacher and a student, shaped his views on education. Avicenna was an advocate for a rigorous and systematic approach to learning, and his works provided guidance for students and scholars who sought to deepen their understanding of medicine, philosophy, and the sciences. Avicenna's relationship with political power, however, was not limited to his personal experiences. His writings reflect a broader concern with the ethical responsibilities of rulers and intellectuals in society. He often emphasized the importance of justice, reason, and wisdom in leadership, and he believed that rulers had a duty to support and promote the intellectual and spiritual welfare of their people. Avicenna's political philosophy was grounded in the idea that true power should be exercised in service of the common good, and that the philosopher, as a wise and just leader, was best equipped to guide society. The instability of Avicenna's life also had a profound effect on his approach to ethics. In a world where intellectuals were often at the mercy of political factions, Avicenna sought to define a system of ethics that was not dependent on external circumstances. His ethical philosophy emphasized the development of the individual through the cultivation of knowledge and wisdom. In this sense, Avicenna believed that personal virtue was the true source of strength, and that intellectual and moral growth were essential to leading a meaningful life. Avicenna's political and social struggles underscored the precarious position of intellectuals in the medieval Islamic world. While some rulers and courts offered support, others saw intellectuals as threats to their authority. Avicenna's ability to navigate this complex terrain while maintaining his scholarly pursuits is a testament to his resilience and intellectual depth. His contributions to philosophy, medicine, and the sciences were shaped not only by his personal intellectual genius, but also by the political and social challenges he faced. In this way, Avicenna's life and work stand as a remarkable example of the relationship between knowledge and power, and the ways in which scholars must adapt and persevere in the face of adversity. Avicenna's intellectual legacy extends far beyond his own time, influencing a wide range of fields, including philosophy, medicine, logic, and ethics, both in the Islamic world and later in the Western world. His works served as a bridge between the ancient Greek philosophers and the medieval scholars of Europe. While Avicenna was an outstanding figure in his own right, his ability to synthesize different intellectual traditions and his meticulous approach to knowledge production set him apart as a towering figure in the history of ideas. His influence continued to shape the development of science and philosophy for centuries after his death. Avicenna's contributions to philosophy were particularly significant, as they influenced both Islamic and Western intellectual traditions. His integration of Aristotelian thought with Neoplatonic ideas, combined with his original theological and metaphysical concepts, established him as one of the most important philosophers of the medieval period. His synthesis of reason and faith, particularly in his discussions of the nature of God, the soul, and existence, would form the basis for later discussions of these topics. Avicenna's concept of the necessary being, wujub al-wujud, in which he posited that there must be a being whose existence is necessary and the cause of all other beings, became central to Islamic metaphysical thought. This idea had a profound influence on later philosophers, such as al-Ghazali, who would later take Avicenna's ideas and critically assess them in his own works. In the West, Avicenna's ideas began to spread as part of the intellectual revival during the Middle Ages, particularly through the translations of his works into Latin. His Canon of Medicine was one of the first works from the Islamic world to be translated into Latin and became a standard medical text in European universities from the 12th century onwards. Avicenna's influence on Western medicine was profound. His methods of diagnosis, treatment, and his systematic approach to medical knowledge were adopted and expanded upon by European scholars, such as Roger Bacon and others who would lay the groundwork for the later development of modern medicine. Avicenna's careful cataloging of medicinal substances, combined with his empirical approach to understanding disease, made his medical writings foundational to the practice of medicine for centuries. Philosophically, Avicenna was influential in the scholastic tradition of medieval Europe, particularly through the works of Thomas Aquinas and other Christian philosophers. Avicenna's interpretation of Aristotle, particularly in his works on metaphysics and logic, provided a starting point for Aquinas and other thinkers who sought to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. Aquinas admired Avicenna's method of reasoning and his logical rigor, and while he did not always agree with Avicenna's conclusions, he incorporated many of Avicenna's ideas into his own system. The work of medieval thinkers such as Albertus Magnus and William of Moerbeke was deeply influenced by the translations of Avicenna's texts into Latin, which helped lay the foundation for the scholastic movement that dominated European universities in the 13th and 14th centuries. Avicenna's legacy in logic was equally transformative. His work on Aristotelian logic helped to preserve and transmit this intellectual tradition to later generations. His commentary on Aristotle's Organon laid the groundwork for later logical developments in both the Islamic and Christian worlds. Avicenna's emphasis on syllogistic reasoning and the principles of formal logic were instrumental in shaping the way subsequent thinkers approached philosophical problems. The principles of logic that he elaborated upon were later incorporated into the curriculum of medieval universities, where they became the basis for the study of philosophy and the sciences. Avicenna's impact on ethics, especially his views on the relationship between reason and morality, also resonated across cultures and centuries. He believed that moral knowledge was not solely derived from divine revelation, but could also be apprehended through reason. This notion that ethics could be grounded in rational inquiry was a key element of Avicenna's philosophy. His belief in the possibility of human beings reaching moral excellence through the cultivation of knowledge and virtue laid the groundwork for later moral philosophy. His influence was particularly evident in the works of thinkers like Maimonides, who was deeply influenced by Avicenna's ethical ideas in his own writings on Jewish law and philosophy. In addition to his contributions to philosophy and medicine, Avicenna's work also had a significant impact on the development of Islamic thought in general. His systematic approach to various fields of knowledge, his effort to reconcile different intellectual traditions, and his insistence on the primacy of reason and empirical observation set a model for later Islamic philosophers. Avicenna's method of inquiry, which combined the rigor of logical reasoning with the insights of empirical observation, was a key influence on later scholars such as Al-Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, Averroes, and Ibn Khaldun. These thinkers, while offering their own critiques and variations, built upon Avicenna's ideas, extending his legacy in new and important directions. Despite the profound influence of his works, Avicenna faced criticism, particularly from religious scholars who felt that his rationalism and his attempts to reconcile philosophy with Islamic theology were problematic. The most famous critique came from Al-Ghazali, who in his incoherence of the philosophers attacked Avicenna's ideas, particularly those related to metaphysics and his understanding of God. Al-Ghazali's critique led to a shift in Islamic thought, with some scholars moving away from Avicenna's rationalism in favor of more mystical and theological approaches. However, Avicenna's influence remained strong, particularly among later philosophers and scientists who valued his rational approach to understanding the natural world. Avicenna's contributions also continued to be relevant during the early modern period. His ideas influenced Renaissance thinkers such as Johannes Kepler and Galileo Galilei, who sought to apply empirical methods to the study of nature. Avicenna's emphasis on observation and the scientific method in his medical works resonated with these early scientists, who sought to move beyond medieval scholasticism and develop a more systematic approach to science. His legacy in the history of medicine and science was part of the broader intellectual shift that led to the scientific revolution. Avicenna's works also influenced later developments in Islamic philosophy, particularly in the context of Persian and Ottoman intellectual thought. His metaphysical and epistemological ideas were central to the philosophical debates of the Safavid period in Iran, where philosophers sought to integrate his teachings with the prevailing Sufi and Shiite theological traditions. His influence remained significant in the intellectual centers of the Islamic world, including in regions such as Central Asia, India, and the Ottoman Empire. Avicenna's intellectual brilliance is best understood not only through his academic contributions, but also by exploring the personal philosophy he developed throughout his life. His philosophical system, deeply rooted in the principles of logic and metaphysics, formed the foundation for many of his scientific, medical, and theological ideas. Avicenna was one of the first thinkers in the Islamic world to rigorously integrate reason with faith, creating a framework that sought to explain the relationship between the human mind, the physical universe, and divine reality. Avicenna's philosophical system was heavily influenced by his study of Aristotle, but it was also enriched by the works of Neoplatonists, such as Plotinus and Proclus, who provided a metaphysical backdrop for his ideas. His unique synthesis of Aristotelian logic and Neoplatonic metaphysics produced a system of thought that was both rational and mystical. For Avicenna, philosophy was the highest form of knowledge, and it was through philosophical inquiry that one could approach the truth about the nature of existence, the soul, and God. This comprehensive and systematic approach to philosophy made Avicenna one of the most important figures in the development of medieval Islamic thought. At the core of Avicenna's metaphysics was the concept of wujub al-wujud, the necessary existence. He proposed that for everything in the universe, there must be a necessary being whose existence is independent and self-sustaining. This necessary being, which he identified as God, is the source of all other existence. According to AVICENNA, everything in the universe is contingent. It depends on something else for its existence. However, the necessary being is not contingent upon anything. This concept of a necessary being was central to his argument for the existence of God, and it became a foundational idea in both Islamic and later Christian philosophy. Avicenna's metaphysical ideas were deeply intertwined with his logical system, particularly his theory of causality. He believed that the universe operates according to a chain of causes and effects, with each cause giving rise to an effect that is logically dependent on the preceding cause. For Avicenna, this chain of causality pointed back to the necessary being, which is the first cause that set everything in motion. His formulation of causality as a logical structure was influential, laying the groundwork for later developments in both Islamic and Western philosophy. Avicenna's influence on later thinkers, particularly in the field of logic, can be seen in the work of philosophers such as Thomas Aquinas, who incorporated Avicenna's ideas on causality into his own arguments for the existence of God. Another central theme in Avicenna's philosophy was his theory of the soul. He believed that the soul was an immaterial and immortal substance, separate from the body but intimately connected to it. According to Avicenna, the soul was responsible for rational thought, and it played a central role in the development of human virtue. He posited that the soul had three faculties: the vegetative, which is responsible for growth and nourishment; the sensitive, which governs sensation and perception; and the rational, which is responsible for intellectual thought. Avicenna's account of the soul was influenced by both Aristotelian and Neoplatonic ideas, but he also added his own insights, particularly regarding the soul's immortality and its connection to the divine. Avicenna's philosophy of the soul had profound implications for his ethical thought. He believed that the ultimate purpose of human life was to cultivate the rational soul, achieving intellectual and moral perfection. For Avicenna, ethics was not a matter of following external rules or divine commandments alone. It was the cultivation of personal virtue through the exercise of reason. The rational soul, once developed, was capable of understanding the divine truths and aligning itself with the will of God. This alignment with the divine would lead to the soul's ultimate perfection and its return to God. Avicenna's conception of ethics emphasized intellectual virtue, self-control, and the pursuit of knowledge as the paths to moral excellence. In his writings on ethics, Avicenna also discussed the role of reason in governing emotions and desires. He believed that human beings could achieve moral virtue through the proper use of reason, which acted as a guide to direct the passions and desires in a way that was consistent with the divine order. Avicenna's ethical system was not merely about adhering to moral codes, but about achieving an internal transformation of the self, wherein reason becomes the ruler of the soul. This perspective aligned closely with his broader philosophical outlook, which emphasized the importance of knowledge as the means to elevate the soul and align it with divine truth. In addition to his rationalist ethical framework, Avicenna's philosophy also addressed the importance of social and political virtue. He believed that human beings did not live in isolation, and thus ethics extended beyond the individual to the broader community. For Avicenna, the ideal society was one in which rulers and citizens alike adhered to moral principles grounded in reason and justice. The philosopher king, a concept inspired by Plato, was an important figure in Avicenna's political philosophy. He envisioned the philosopher king as a ruler who not only had intellectual knowledge, but also possessed the wisdom to govern justly. Such a ruler would be able to guide the people toward moral and intellectual excellence, leading society toward a state of harmony and order. In Avicenna's view, knowledge and wisdom were essential not only for personal enlightenment, but also for the collective well-being of society. The role of the philosopher, therefore, was not confined to individual intellectual pursuits, but extended to the shaping of society through the application of reason and moral principles. This belief in the transformative power of knowledge would influence later Islamic philosophers, such as Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd, Averroes, who engaged with Avicenna's ideas and either adapted or critiqued them in their own philosophical systems. Avicenna's personal philosophy was also shaped by his spiritual beliefs. While his intellectualism often drew him toward rationalist explanations of the universe, he did not reject the role of divine revelation. He believed that reason and faith were complementary, and that true knowledge could only be attained through both rational inquiry and spiritual insight. Avicenna's spirituality was rooted in Islamic mysticism, and he was influenced by Sufism in his later years. His integration of rational philosophy with mysticism marked him as a unique figure in the history of Islamic thought, bridging the gap between the intellectual and the spiritual. Finally, Avicenna's legacy as a philosopher was not merely the result of his logical and metaphysical systems, but also his approach to knowledge as a holistic and interconnected whole. His philosophical system was not just an academic exercise, but a guide for living a life that harmonized reason, virtue, and spirituality. For Avicenna, the pursuit of knowledge was not an isolated activity, but a means to elevate the soul, achieve moral excellence, and ultimately unite with the divine. His philosophical ideas, therefore, represented a comprehensive vision of human existence, one that emphasized the centrality of intellect, morality, and spirituality in the pursuit of truth. Avicenna's contributions to medicine remain some of the most influential in the history of the field. His medical masterpiece, the Canon of Medicine, Al-Canon fi al-Tib, became the authoritative medical text in both the Islamic world and medieval Europe for centuries. Avicenna's approach to medicine was a unique blend of empirical observation, rational deduction, and the integration of various medical traditions, including Greco-Roman, Persian, and Indian knowledge. His deep understanding of anatomy, physiology, pathology, and therapeutics, combined with his systematic approach to medical science, laid the foundation for much of medieval and early modern medicine. The Canon was a comprehensive medical encyclopedia that outlined a systematic approach to diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of disease. Avicenna organized the Canon into 5 books. The first dealt with general principles of medicine, the second with the properties of drugs, the third with diseases of the body, the fourth with diseases of the organs, and the fifth with the effects of the soul on the body. Each section was based on Avicenna's observations and interpretations of classical Greek and Roman medical texts, particularly the works of Hippocrates and Galen, but he also integrated the medical knowledge of his time, including insights from Persian and Indian sources. Avicenna's diagnostic methods were revolutionary for their time. He emphasized the importance of careful observation and logical reasoning in identifying and understanding diseases. His approach to diagnosis was systematic. He stressed the need for a comprehensive examination of the patient, including the evaluation of symptoms, medical history, and lifestyle factors. This holistic approach to patient care was a hallmark of Avicenna's medical philosophy, and it laid the groundwork for modern clinical practices that emphasize thorough patient histories and observation. One of the most important aspects of the Canon was its integration of the theory of humors. This theory, which had been introduced by Hippocrates and refined by Galen, posited that the human body is governed by 4 basic bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Avicenna expanded on this concept, detailing how imbalances in these humors could lead to illness and disease. His understanding of the humoral theory was more sophisticated than previous interpretations, as he incorporated insights from his own observations and clinical experience. He also recognized that external factors such as diet, climate, and environment played a crucial role in maintaining the balance of the humors and preventing disease. In addition to his diagnostic methods, Avicenna made significant contributions to the understanding of various diseases and their treatment. His canon includes detailed descriptions of many diseases, from common ailments like fevers and colds to more complex conditions like tuberculosis and cancer. He introduced a number of medical treatments that were used widely for centuries, including herbal remedies, dietary recommendations, and surgical techniques. Avicenna's knowledge of pharmacology was especially advanced for his time. He classified and described hundreds of medicinal plants and substances, many of which were used for centuries after his death. Avicenna also made important contributions to the field of surgery. While surgery, during his time, was still in its infancy, Avicenna was one of the first to describe the principles of surgical techniques in a systematic way. He advocated for cleanliness and sterilization, recognizing the importance of hygiene in preventing infection. He also described procedures for treating wounds, fractures, and abscesses, many of which were later adopted by surgeons in both the Islamic world and Europe. Avicenna's insights into surgical practices were so advanced that they influenced European surgery well into the Renaissance. One of the more controversial aspects of Avicenna's medical writings was his treatment of mental illness. He was among the first to approach mental disorders from a medical, rather than purely spiritual, perspective. Avicenna recognized that mental illnesses, such as depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia, were diseases of the mind and should be treated with a combination of therapy and medication. He proposed that the mind and body were intricately linked, and that mental illness could often be treated through physical methods such as diet, exercise, and herbal remedies. This approach was revolutionary in its time, as mental illness had largely been attributed to demonic possession or divine punishment in many cultures. Avicenna's work was not limited to the canon. He wrote extensively on topics such as anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, and hygiene. His book of healing, Kitab al-Shifa, for instance, was another comprehensive work in which he explored the broader relationship between the mind, body, and soul. In this text, Avicenna presented a philosophical and scientific account of human health, discussing not only physical health but also the role of intellect and emotions in the overall well-being of an individual. His belief that health was a harmony of body and mind resonated throughout his work, influencing later medical practitioners and philosophers who would build upon his insights. Avicenna's influence on medieval European medicine was profound. When his works were translated into Latin in the 12th and 13th centuries, they became essential texts in European universities. The Canon of Medicine was one of the most widely read medical books in the Middle Ages, and it remained a standard textbook in European medical schools until the 17th century. Avicenna's approach to medicine, which emphasized systematic observation, logical deduction, and empirical research, was foundational to the development of modern medical practice. His influence extended beyond medicine into other fields, including astronomy, chemistry, and philosophy, all of which were integral to the medical knowledge of the time. Despite the challenges of the medieval period, Avicenna's medical practices were remarkably advanced. His holistic view of health, combining both physical and mental aspects of well-being, was a precursor to modern holistic medicine. His emphasis on preventive care, the balance of the humors, and the interconnectedness of body and mind were concepts that would not gain widespread acceptance in the Western world until many centuries later. Yet, Avicenna's early recognition of these principles set the stage for modern medical paradigms. In addition to his written works, Avicenna's influence extended through his students and disciples, many of whom became renowned physicians in their own right. His medical teachings were passed down through the generations, influencing both Islamic and Western medical traditions. Notable students, such as Al-Razi, Rhazes, built upon Avicenna's medical theories and further refined them, contributing to the continued development of medical science. Avicenna's canon continued to be a reference point for scholars and physicians throughout the Islamic world, and his influence on European medicine remained strong throughout the Renaissance and into the early modern period. Avicenna's medical legacy continues to be recognized today. His contributions to the understanding of diseases, treatments, and the role of the physician as a rational, empirical investigator laid the groundwork for much of modern medical practice. Even in the present day, Avicenna's writings on medicine are studied by scholars and practitioners, and his innovative approach to diagnosis and treatment continues to inspire those in the field. His pioneering work in medicine, much like his contributions to philosophy, has stood the test of time, proving that his insights were not only ahead of his era, but timeless in their relevance. Avicenna's contributions to Islamic thought transcend the boundaries of medicine, philosophy, and science. His works became cornerstones of Islamic intellectualism, blending the ancient Greek philosophical traditions with Islamic teachings in ways that left a lasting impact on scholars, theologians, and thinkers throughout the Islamic world and beyond. While he is most celebrated for his writings in medicine and metaphysics, his influence on the development of Islamic thought, particularly in the areas of logic, theology, and ethics, cannot be overstated. Avicenna's integration of Aristotelian and Neoplatonic philosophy with Islamic teachings created a distinctive intellectual framework that bridged the gap between reason and revelation. His philosophy emphasized the importance of rational thought, but it did not dismiss religious belief. For Avicenna, reason and faith were not opposed but complementary. This unique synthesis made his work both accessible and controversial. On the one hand, his rationalistic approach to philosophy provided intellectual rigor to Islamic theological discussions. On the other hand, his ideas often conflicted with more conservative elements within the Islamic world, particularly those who viewed rational philosophy as a threat to the authority of religious tradition. One of the most significant ways in which Avicenna shaped Islamic thought was through his influence on the development of Islamic theology, or Kalam. Avicenna's arguments about the nature of existence, the relationship between the creator and the created world, and the immortality of the soul were deeply intertwined with Islamic theological discussions. His work helped to formulate a sophisticated discourse on the nature of God, the creation of the world, and the relationship between the divine and human beings. Avicenna's philosophical works, particularly his arguments for the existence of God, became essential reading for Islamic theologians, particularly those in the Asharite and Mutazilite schools. Avicenna's influence on Islamic theology was not limited to his philosophical writings. It also extended to his commentary on the Quran. His method of interpretation, which combined rational analysis with spiritual insight, became a model for later Islamic scholars. By emphasizing the harmony between reason and divine revelation, Avicenna's interpretation of the Quran reflected his broader philosophical stance that truth could be found both through intellectual inquiry and through divine wisdom. His work demonstrated that philosophy and theology could coexist and enrich each other, a perspective that would continue to shape Islamic thought for centuries to come. Another area in which Avicenna made a profound impact was in the field of logic. His detailed commentaries on the works of Aristotle, particularly in the areas of syllogistic logic and metaphysical reasoning, were instrumental in shaping the Islamic intellectual tradition. Avicenna expanded upon Aristotle's ideas, refining and adapting them to fit the Islamic worldview. His contributions to logic were essential in laying the groundwork for the later development of Islamic and Western philosophical thought. His use of logic as a tool for understanding metaphysical truths, the nature of being, and the structure of the universe was groundbreaking and would influence generations of philosophers. Avicenna's logical and metaphysical system, which centered around his concept of the necessary existence and the necessary being, God, became foundational to many Islamic philosophers, most notably in the school of thought known as peripatetic philosophy, also referred to as philosophy. This school, which continued the work of Aristotle, was characterized by its systematic use of reason and logic to understand a natural world, the soul, and God. Avicenna's contributions to this school were so influential that many later philosophers, such as Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd, Averroes, engaged directly with his ideas, either to build upon them or to critique them. The influence of Avicenna's ideas also spread beyond the Islamic world into medieval Europe. His works were translated into Latin in the 12th century, where they played a crucial role in shaping the development of scholasticism. European thinkers, such as Thomas Aquinas, drew heavily from Avicenna's writings, particularly in his arguments for the existence of God and the nature of the soul. Aquinas, in particular, acknowledged Avicenna's influence and integrated elements of his thought into his own theological and philosophical system. Avicenna's works were studied at European universities and became integral to the intellectual fabric of the Middle Ages. Despite the reverence for Avicenna in both the Islamic and Western worlds, his ideas were not without controversy. Within the Islamic world, his blending of rational philosophy with Islamic theology led to fierce debates. Many of the more conservative religious scholars, particularly those aligned with the Asharite school of thought, rejected Avicenna's rationalism, accusing him of over-intellectualizing the divine and misinterpreting Islamic teachings. In response, philosophers such as Al-Ghazali critiqued Avicenna's metaphysical ideas, especially his views on the existence of God and the relationship between the divine and the created world. These debates were central to the intellectual climate of the time, and Avicenna's influence continued to spark controversy for centuries. Avicenna's impact also extended beyond philosophy and theology to the development of Islamic ethics. His ethical framework, which was deeply influenced by Aristotelian thought, focused on the cultivation of virtue through the exercise of reason. He emphasized the role of the rational soul in achieving moral and intellectual perfection, arguing that human beings could align their wills with divine truth through intellectual and moral discipline. This vision of ethics, grounded in rationality and virtue, contributed to the development of Islamic ethical thought and was a precursor to later Islamic ethical systems. In the realm of science, Avicenna's work on natural philosophy, particularly in areas such as astronomy, physics, and chemistry, was groundbreaking. His scientific contributions were closely tied to his philosophical and theological ideas, as he believed that understanding the natural world was key to understanding the divine. Avicenna's scientific works, such as his treatises on optics and his theories of motion, influenced both Islamic and European scientific thought. His ability to synthesize and systematize knowledge from various traditions laid the groundwork for future advancements in scientific inquiry. Avicenna's legacy within the Islamic world is reflected in the continued reverence for his works by scholars throughout the centuries. His influence can be seen in the works of later thinkers, such as Ibn Rushd, Al-Tusi, and Al-Farabi, all of whom engage with his ideas in various ways. His writings were widely circulated and became integral to the education of Islamic scholars. Avicenna's ability to merge reason with spirituality, science with philosophy, and logic with ethics made him one of the most influential figures in the Islamic intellectual tradition, and his legacy continues to shape the way we understand the relationship between reason, faith, and the natural world. The death of Avicenna in 1037 marked the end of a remarkable life that had profoundly shaped the intellectual and cultural landscape of his time. However, his impact on the world did not cease with his passing. Avicenna's legacy, both within the Islamic world and beyond, continued to resonate for centuries, influencing the development of various fields of knowledge, from philosophy and medicine to ethics and science. His works were passed down through generations of scholars, translated into multiple languages, and integrated into the curricula of medieval European universities. The ideas he championed became central to both Islamic and Western intellectual traditions, making him a figure whose influence transcended geographical and cultural boundaries. One of the primary reasons for Avicenna's enduring legacy was the breadth and depth of his intellectual contributions. His works, particularly the canon of medicine and his various philosophical treatises, represented the pinnacle of the synthesis between ancient Greek thought and Islamic intellectualism. Avicenna's ability to integrate the rationalism of Aristotle and the mystical insights of Neoplatonism with Islamic theology created a framework for thinking that was both comprehensive and adaptable. He didn't merely transmit the ideas of others. He transformed them, shaping them to fit the intellectual climate of his time. His blend of reason and faith provided a model for generations of thinkers who sought to reconcile religious belief with the rational inquiry of the natural world. In the Islamic world, Avicenna's influence was monumental. His philosophy became an essential part of the curriculum in major centers of learning across the Islamic Empire, including Baghdad, Cairo, and Andalusia. His ideas were adopted and expanded upon by subsequent generations of scholars, including those who belong to the Philosophy tradition, which built on the works of Aristotle, Plotinus, and Avicenna himself. Figures like Al-Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, Averroes, and Al-Tusi, although sometimes in disagreement with Avicenna's ideas, could not escape his influence. Even those who criticized his work were forced to engage with it, marking him as a central figure in Islamic intellectual history. Avicenna's impact on medicine also ensured his place in history. The canon of medicine remained a fundamental text for centuries, guiding medical practitioners not only in the Islamic world but also in Europe. Translated into Latin in the 12th century, the canon became a cornerstone of medieval medical education in the West. It was studied and referenced by European physicians throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, influencing figures such as Roger Bacon and William of Ockham. Even after the rise of modern medicine, Avicenna's work continued to be cited as a foundational text in the history of the medical sciences. His methods of diagnosis, his understanding of the body's humors, and his pharmacological knowledge were critical in the development of medical practice for many centuries. Beyond the realm of medicine, Avicenna's contributions to logic and metaphysics laid the groundwork for future developments in both Islamic and Western philosophy. His commentaries on Aristotle's Organon introduced sophisticated systems of logic that influenced not only Islamic philosophers but also European scholastics. In the West, his integration of Aristotelian logic with Christian theology was instrumental in the development of scholasticism. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and John Duns Scotus drew on Avicenna's ideas, especially his proofs for the existence of God and his concept of the necessary being. Avicenna's metaphysical system, particularly his notion of the necessary existence and the emanation of being from God, provided a framework that would influence both Islamic mysticism and Western metaphysical thought. The transmission of Avicenna's ideas to Europe was particularly significant during the intellectual awakening of the 12th and 13th centuries. The translation movement that took place in centers like Toledo, Spain, and Sicily brought many of Avicenna's works into Latin, making them accessible to a broader European audience. The canon of medicine, the Book of Healing, and Avicenna's philosophical treatises became part of the curriculum in the universities of medieval Europe. His work bridged the gap between classical Greek philosophy and Christian theological thought, showing how reason and revelation could coexist. His influence on European scholars was profound, and his work played a crucial role in the development of Western thought during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. In addition to his philosophical and scientific legacy, Avicenna's contributions to ethics were equally influential. His ethical writings, particularly in his Book of Healing, laid out a vision of morality based on intellectual and spiritual perfection. Avicenna believed that ethical behavior could be achieved through the cultivation of virtue and the alignment of one's actions with reason and divine law. This perspective on ethics, which emphasized personal responsibility and the pursuit of knowledge, became foundational in both Islamic and Western ethical systems. His understanding of the soul, its faculties, and its relationship to the body shaped later ethical theories and continued to inspire moral philosophers for centuries. Avicenna's ideas also had a significant impact on the development of Islamic mysticism, or Sufism. His philosophical works, particularly his theories on the nature of the soul, the relationship between the physical and spiritual worlds, and the role of divine illumination, resonated with Sufi thinkers. Sufism, which emphasizes the direct experience of the divine and the purification of the soul, found in Avicenna's writings a philosophical framework that helped to articulate mystical experiences in rational terms. Avicenna's notion of the active intellect and the ascent of the soul through knowledge were themes that influenced later Sufi philosophers, such as Ibn Arabi, who sought to reconcile philosophy and mysticism. In the modern era, Avicenna's legacy remains influential. His works are still studied in universities worldwide, and his contributions to philosophy, medicine, and ethics continue to be explored by scholars in various fields. In the Arab world, his status as one of the greatest intellectuals in history remains unchallenged. In the West, Avicenna is often remembered as one of the pivotal figures in the transmission of ancient Greek thought into medieval Europe. His work helped shape the intellectual foundations of the Renaissance, and his philosophical insights remain relevant to contemporary discussions in metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. In the context of modern Islamic thought, AVICENNA continues to be a figure of immense importance. His intellectual synthesis of reason and faith offers a model for contemporary Muslim scholars seeking to engage with modernity while remaining rooted in Islamic tradition. AVICENNA's legacy challenges the notion that Islamic thought and Western scientific inquiry are incompatible. Instead, his work demonstrates the potential for intellectual engagement across cultures and traditions, offering a bridge between the rational sciences and religious belief that continues to inspire Muslim thinkers today. AVICENNA's enduring legacy also serves as a reminder of the power of intellectual curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge. His life, shaped by personal struggle, ambition, and an insatiable thirst for learning, exemplifies the transformative power of scholarship. AVICENNA's ability to synthesize vast amounts of knowledge from different traditions, while simultaneously developing new ideas and approaches, underscores the value of intellectual humility and creativity. His life serves as a model for scholars and thinkers who seek to contribute meaningfully to the world, not only through the accumulation of knowledge, but through its application to the betterment of humanity. In conclusion, AVICENNA's legacy is one of intellectual brilliance and far-reaching influence. His work continues to shape the intellectual, scientific, and cultural landscapes of both the Islamic world and the West. His synthesis of philosophy, science, and theology laid the groundwork for future generations of thinkers and scholars. Through his writings and his example, AVICENNA's impact endures, reminding us of the enduring power of human intellect and the pursuit of knowledge in bridging the gap between cultures, traditions, and disciplines.